17 years. I have been doing this for 17 bloody years. And in all that time, this particular paranormal case has to be one of the most morbid cases I have ever seen. My name is Harrison Ward, and as you all know, I'm a paranormal investigator. I have helped solve numerous paranormal cases in the past, but the details of the paranormal case you're about to hear is one I'll never forget. It all started on the 12th of October, 2009. I had received a call from a couple in the suburbs. The couple claimed they were experiencing some paranormal disturbances in their home, and they wanted to enlist my help to get rid of the abnormal presence that was terrorizing them. I usually don't take jobs like this, as most of the time, the people calling were usually prank callers pulling stupid stunts, and since I wasn't there in person like I usually am with these jobs, I couldn't tell if they were being genuine or not. But from the tension and fear I noticed in the man's voice during the call, I knew there was something more to this. So I gave them the benefit of the doubt, and I went to check it out. I arrived at the couple's house the very next day, and before I knocked on the door, I could already tell something was wrong. I could smell it from the car, but standing in front of their home now, the foul smell was much more potent. If you've ever dabbled in my line of work, you'll know how important it is to have a keen sense of smell, because as a paranormal investigator, the first rule they'll ever tell you is, beware the smell of rotting food. That was the signature scent of otherworldly creatures. This odor was quite unique, as while it did bear similar resemblance to that of human rotten food, its smell was far more potent than normal rotting food. So we could always tell the difference. Everyday normal people usually wouldn't be able to perceive it, but after entering the world of the paranormal, it becomes very easy to pick up. Knowing full well this case was the real deal now, I knocked on the door and got to work. After talking with the couple for a few minutes, I had already noticed a lot of odd things about this household. For starters, their names were Don and Gertrude Floyd. Don was in his early 40s and Gertrude was in her late 30s. Their dynamic was, in one word, perplexing, as someone would never guess that these two people were a couple that had been married for 12 years. Another thing I found perplexing was how young Don's wife Gertrude looked. Don't get me wrong, I know that most women nowadays look youthful well into their 30s, but for a woman that was 38 years of age, she really looked like she was in her early 20s. I assumed she must have some amazing genes, as nothing else really seemed odd about her. And as far as I could tell, she was a nice and well-mannered woman. Don, on the other hand, was very different. The man looked far older than his age, and the bags under his eyes told me that he hadn't been getting enough sleep for the past few months. As a paranormal investigator, it was always good to pick up and analyze the clients you're working for, as you always get clues from there. And after I was done with my primary analysis, I decided to get on with the case. It took about an hour 30 minutes, but after hearing the paranormal problems the Floyds had been experiencing, I realized that their case was a very bizarre one. At first, the couple told me that in their 12 years of marriage, they haven't been able to have children. I was confused now, as I knew it was fairly common for couples to have problems conceiving children. But what they told me next was shocking, as Gertrude revealed that she had been pregnant 6 times already, but after 8 months, during the final weeks of her pregnancies, all 6 of her babies died inside her. This was odd, as while I knew many women suffered miscarriages 2 to 3 times in their lives, losing your unborn child 6 times in a row, at the exact same time, and in the exact same manner was too much to be called a coincidence. The couple stated that, even if it was painful, they had decided to try again, but that's when something disturbing started happening to Don. Don told me that for the past few months, he had been constantly hearing the wails and cries of little infants, and he believes that they are the souls of his dead children who are now calling out to him. Now, I'd been in this business long enough to know when someone was lying. But with one look at Don Floyd, I knew he was telling the truth. I remember looking Don dead in the eyes as he told me through tears, "Believe me, Mr. Harrison, I can hear them. I don't know how, but I can hear my babies. They're calling and crying out to me, and I can't do anything. I can't do anything to help them." Seeing this man break down before my eyes was hard. His wife Gertrude was also crying now, so I told them, "I am truly sorry for the massive loss that both of you have gone through, Mr. and Mrs. Floyd. And while I can't bring your children back, I promise to help and protect you while I get to the bottom of this paranormal experience." After saying that, I proceeded to calm them down before asking them a question that had been on my mind. The question was for Gertrude as I looked at her and said, "What about you, Miss Floyd? Do you by any chance also hear these constant wails and cries of infants that your husband Don hears?" Gertrude had already stopped crying now, so she looked me in the eyes and said, "No, I truly don't hear anything." 1,000 thoughts passed through my mind as I heard her answer. I actually assumed that she would be the major one to hear these phantom cries, as she was the children's mother. And as I looked into her eyes, I could tell something was off. After asking Gertrude my question, I looked at Don and asked if we could talk alone. So Gertrude stood up to leave. When she had left, I immediately asked Don how Gertrude had been taking this entire ordeal. Don then said, "Well, she's been really hurt by this, as every mother would, but she never dwells on the loss too much, as she always seems eager for us to try again. I thought after the loss of our fourth child, she would stop trying, but she didn't. She just wanted us to immediately try again when she recovered from the miscarriage. I know she really wants to give birth to our child, and it really kills me that no matter how much I try, I can't give her that." When Don was done speaking, I told him, "Thanks for answering, and while I don't mean to pry, I'd like to ask how she felt about calling and inviting me to your home." Don then took a short pause before saying, "Well, to be honest, she didn't really want us to do this, and to be totally honest, I really feel like she doesn't believe me when I say I can hear our children's cries. Even when I told her what was going on, she said it was probably just an anxiety attack caused by the recurring loss of our kids. She then said it'll pass soon and there was no need to call a paranormal investigator, but things just got worse, and when it didn't eventually pass, I had no other option but to call you without her approval." I thanked Don for answering me truthfully before saying, "Well, that's all my questions, but before I go, can I look around the house?" Don quickly agreed as he took me around the house. Everything seemed fine in the house after my inspection, but there was something that caught my attention, and it was the massive tree growing in the backyard. I asked Don if they planted it, and he responded saying, "Believe it or not, we actually didn't plant this tree. It's been there since we moved into this house after we got married. It wasn't always this big, though. It used to be a very little thing that I wanted to uproot, but all of a sudden it grew into this massive tree." I then asked him, "Do you know what type of tree it is, and has it ever bore any fruit?" Don then replied, I actually don't. At first I thought it was an apple or a pear tree, but as time went on I couldn't really tell. The patterns on its leaves are very unique, and surprisingly, it doesn't bear any fruit." I had finally gotten everything I needed to know, so I told Don, "Well, that would be all, Mr. Floyd. Thank you for explaining everything in detail. I'll see you tomorrow morning to continue this investigation." And with that, I left the Floyd's home. On my way back, I thought about a lot of things. I recalled the moment when I saw the couple break down, and while it was a messed up thought, I couldn't help but feel like Gertrude's tears were fake. I knew she was their mother and the major person who suffered through these incidents, but as I said earlier, I knew when people were being genuine and truthful, and something was really off about her words and her crocodile tears. Even though I felt like this, I didn't want to jump to any conclusions, so I thought about the other odd thing I noticed, and that was the tree. I could smell the stench of rotten food coming from it, so I knew this strange tree had something to do with the paranormal experiences they had been experiencing in their home. And while I didn't know exactly what it was, I was going to make sure I find out the very next day. Once the next day arrived, I went to the Floyd's home. The foul stench of rotting food had increased tenfold now, as I could already smell it from down the street. Whatever thing was terrorizing them had to be very powerful for it to be releasing this kind of potent smell. So just to be on the safe side, I chanted the words of the exorcist robe, as it was a mantra that protected me from demonic and occultic beings. After that, I went into the house and asked the couple to follow me into the backyard. We were all surrounding the tree now, and I brought out a lighter and blessed wood. This blessed wood wasn't just any type of wood, because as the name entailed, it was wood that was doused in holy water before it was dried and blessed by a priest. This type of wood was necessary whenever you wanted to burn objects or things that had been soiled by demons or evil spirits. And as I lit the wood with my lighter, the blue flame sparked to life. Gertrude now had a nervous look on her face as she asked, "Excuse me, Mr. Harrison, but "What are you going to do with that fire?" I then responded with, "Well, I'm going to use it to burn the tree." I then saw rage fill Gertrude's eyes as she screamed the words, "No, no! I love that tree! You can't burn it!" I could see the shocked look on Don's face now, as he wondered why his wife was acting like this over a tree, but all my suspicions were finally confirmed. Gertrude had started forcing her husband Don to stop me from burning the tree, and while he didn't want to stop me at first, he was a man who loved his wife, so he told me not to. I then told them that since it was what they wanted, I wouldn't burn the tree, and as Gertrude, who had managed to compose herself, said these words, "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. You don't know what this tree means to me." I threw the flame at the base of the tree. The screaming of infants filled the entire backyard as the flame touched the tree. Like acid eating through plastic, the fire burnt its way through the roots of the tree, and when it was done, the sight we saw was ghastly. The fresh bodies of 6 infants were found at the base of the tree. These babies had no skin, and I could see the roots of the tree had morbidly grown from their heads. Don, who was standing next to me, started to vomit while his wife, Gertrude, fell to her knees. I had seen a lot of horrendous and unspeakable things during my time as a paranormal investigator, but this was too much for me. I held myself from throwing up as I knew I had to compose myself. Don, who had a distraught look on his face, screamed the words, "Can someone please tell me what the hell is going on?" This was usually one of the hardest parts of this job, and it was telling these families the truth. But I knew I had no other choice. So I looked Don dead in the eyes and I said, "I'm very sorry, Don, but your wife, Gertrude, is not who you think she is. From what I can tell, she probably made a bargain with a demonic being and sold the lives of your 6 infants for eternal youth. I've had my suspicions, but this confirmed it. I've seen similar cases like this before, but they have never been this horrible. Unfortunately, this is how these things work, as the major rule when bargaining with demons is simple. Something given, something taken. So youth was given, and the lives of your children were taken." Gertrude, who had now given up on denying these horrendous occultic acts she had been carrying out, started screaming the words, "You would never understand, but I had to do it. Don, I had to do it. What am I without my youth? I don't want to be a ragged old hag you'll throw to the side once I showed some wrinkles. So I did this for us, to save our marriage. We can always have more children, so it was a small price to pay." When she was done screaming, I noticed her husband Don was completely speechless as he just stared at her. This was the second time I had seen him break down, and I didn't blame him because there was only so much a man can take. But before he could say anything, the foul smell of rotten food suddenly filled the backyard. It was far worse than before now, and I couldn't help but throw up. After I had thrown up, I noticed that the tree, which was surprisingly still standing, started to do one of the strangest things I had ever seen. A hole opened up in the middle of its bark, and this tree regurgitated a woman-like humanoid creature I had never seen before. This creature possessed the structure of a female human, but that's where the resemblances stopped, as it bore no mouth or eyes. Its hands also had no fingers, and the creature stared right at Gertrude. As I said, this thing had no mouth, but when it spoke, I could hear its words in my soul as it said, "To the one called Gertrude, our bargain has been terminated. I told you that as long as this tree grew and blossomed, so will your youth grow and blossom. I have been cheated, and I've come to take back what is mine." At first, I assumed this thing was a witch, but as I studied its movements and mannerisms, I realized that this creature was something far worse than the usual witch or evil spirit I always handled. I figured it was using a disguise to hide its true form, as high-level demons and spirits usually did that to throw off paranormal investigators and exorcists. Its identity was its power. So I spoke the words from the Scroll of Truth, a mantra that revealed the truth to one's eyes. The mantra annoyed the creature as it started to shriek, and it didn't take long before its skin began to tear off and its true nature was revealed. The sight of this creature sent chills up my spine. The Latin name is Il Equiavarus, and that roughly translates to the one who's greedy or the greedy one. It was a beast that feasted on the flesh of humans, And while it's been known by many names all through the years, it is widely known today as the Wendigo. The creature possessed long horn-like protrusions from its head that looked like antlers. It stood on its hind legs, and its face resembled that of an elongated skull. After being a paranormal investigator for all these years, I knew at that moment I was totally out of my league. Wendigos were very hard demonic beasts to kill, but I wasn't going to give up. I started to chant the words of the pure mantra, as it was a chant that banished demons and evil spirits, but before I could even say the words, the Wendigo struck me in my torso. The blow threw me all the way to the wall, and I hit my head hard. My vision was blurry now, and I couldn't see much, but I could tell the creature was shrieking in pain. The exorcist robe mantra had worked, and while I didn't take a lot of damage, I would have died without it. I didn't need anyone to tell me that my ribs were broken and I had a bleeding gash on my head. I stood on my feet and started reciting the mantra, but once again, I started to hear the Wendigo's voice in my head as it taunted me, saying,
"You feeble humans just never learned. I was here before you walked the earth, and I'll be here when you all meet your deaths. You cast me out like I'm any different, when in reality, we are just the same, because while we may look different, we are both greedy beasts."
I ignored the creature's words of temptation as I continued to chant the words of the pure. But the Wendigo continued with,
"Save your breath. I'm not a low-level being, so those petty chants won't work on me. You have managed to save yourself from death by protecting yourself with the unseen robe. But I will show you just how powerless you are by killing these humans in front of you."
When I heard this, I immediately tried to move toward Don to protect him, but my legs gave out. I had fallen to my feet now, and I was coughing blood. The creature already had Don in its clutches, and I could hear him screaming for my help. I tried and I tried, but my body couldn't move. I could only sit and watch how the Wendigo morbidly reached into Don's head and gouged out his left eye to eat. Don's screams filled the entire place, and knowing the kind of creatures Wendigos were, I knew exactly what was going to happen next. In the paranormal world, it was known that Wendigos were creatures that picked out and chose the parts of the human body they liked to consume. They started with the eyes before moving toward the intestine, and when they were done, they would tear out and consume the flesh of their victims. And even though I knew this, nothing prepared me for that sight. I watched in horror as Don's right eye was ripped out and swallowed by the beast. I then watched as his stomach was torn open and his intestines were eaten. Don was dead now, but his corpse was mutilated even more as his skin was torn off his body and consumed. And no matter how much I tried, I could do nothing but watch how the man I swore to protect was turned into a sadistic human buffet before my eyes. When the Wendigo was done, it turned its sights on Gertrude. I watched as Gertrude started screaming the words, "Please, I can marry another man and give you more infants to consume. Please, just let me go." But her pleas fell on deaf ears as I watched again how her eyes were gouged out, how her intestines were eaten, and how her skin was ripped off her corpse and consumed. When it was finally done, the Wendigo looked directly at me. No words were said as it just stood there and revealed its bloody teeth. At first, I couldn't tell what it was doing, but I soon realized that the creature was mocking me by smiling. And just as it appeared out of the tree, the creature vanished into thin air. I remember lying on the floor as I was still unable to move. I really don't know how long I lay there for. I'm guessing it was probably 2 hours. But eventually, I got the strength to stumble to my car, and as I got in, I cried. I cried and cried until my eyes were sore. I had been doing this for so many years now, but I still couldn't get over the loss of the people I was meant to protect as a paranormal investigator. I knew that the blood of Don, his wife, and his 6 children were on my hands, as I couldn't defeat the creature that had taken their lives. Not all cases had a happy ending, as I swore to help and protect him, but in the end, I did nothing but watch him die. It was hard, but this was the path I chose, and even though it wasn't easy, I had to keep moving forward because, at the end of the day, it's just as my father used to say. Such was the life of a paranormal investigator.